Welcome to Workforce 3.0. Today, I'm very excited to have Michael Corey, the Executive Director of the Human Services Chamber, as my guest. Welcome, Michael, to our interview. I appreciate you taking the time for doing this.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here.
The first thing I want to ask you about is what can you tell me about the Human Services Chamber? Not everybody knows about it, and I'd like to give you an opportunity to tell people about it.
Sure. So we're essentially a chamber of commerce for 110 health and human services nonprofits that provide services in Franklin County and the Columbus region, and some across the whole state of Ohio, and some even nationally. And our job is to advocate for them and provide business supports, a range of business supports, and help the helpers. And however that manifests from day to day, it surely shifts with whatever crisis is on our doorstep. But our job is to just be as malleable and helpful as we can possibly be. And I feel like I have the best job in the world in supporting 110 people that I admire personally and professionally. However, I can possibly do that. So
And do you only cover Franklin County?
we only cover Franklin County, but we work with the state government as well as federal government. And again, a lot of our agencies have a reach well outside of Franklin County, but we certainly focus very much so on the 614 zip code.
So the reason why I asked that is because I want people to recognize you said 110, and that is just in Franklin County. So we have a lot of service organizations, which is fantastic. What is your membership criteria?
It's actually pretty straightforward. If you're a direct services provider providing services in Franklin County and you're a C3, you're eligible to apply to be a member of the Human Service Chamber, and you pay dues to be a member of our organization that are tiered depending upon your agency's revenue from the prior year. We've been a little bit lax with that over the last year, just to ensure anyone that wanted to be a part of the chamber could be a part of the chamber, regardless of their ability to pay. We just wanted to help as much as we could over the last 11 months. And no one has said we don't want to pay, but we just want to open up that umbrella as much as we can and come together and do the work to better the community.
So this has been a tough year, I think, as you were alluding to with the pandemic. What kind of effect has that had on your membership?
It's been pretty extraordinary. And I'll start with the positive, which is to say they have found a way to keep going and keep providing services, to keep their doors open to provide services in a way that I'm not sure any other sector has been able to do. And that's been due to their fortitude, their creativity, their stick-to-itiveness, as they say, but also the generosity of the community. The city and this county has found ways to ensure they could keep their lights on. And there have been some that have really needed the help, and philanthropy, government, individuals, business, higher ed, the arts, they've all found a way to be of support to the sector. But the effect was dramatic and it was significant.
Oh, yeah.
Right away in March, just as with everybody else, there were layoffs, there were furloughs, there were programs shuttered, and a lot of business models were completely kneecapped just because of the nature of this virus. And yet, Governor DeWine's stay-at-home order and emergency declaration back, I think it was March 18th or March 19th.
We're coming up on a year, yeah.
Yeah. It specifically called out human services organizations as being essential businesses. So all these organizations kept churning, most of them still in person, to deliver the care that was needed. And obviously for some, the needs that they were trying to meet soared a little bit more than other elements of the sector, in food in particular, in shelters, in housing. But everyone has been affected in some way or another, and in no way has it ever been subtle. And they have all found a way to keep going. Not one of our members, new or old, has closed its doors since this
That's
crisis
fantastic.
began, which is incredible. Now, will that remain the case? I think that depends on a lot of factors, but as of now, I'm enormously proud of that fact. And I think that's, again, a testament to them as well as the community support.
So with 110 members, that's a substantial workforce, really, for the county. And I'm curious as to before the pandemic and when you look forward to whatever the new normal
Right.
is, um, what you think we need to do to be encouraging people to want to go into what is primarily the nonprofit sector. There's a lot of perceptions, not all of them true, about what it means to work in the nonprofit sector. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
That's a fantastic question. Let me start with a baseline. It's difficult to pinpoint how many people work in health and human services nonprofits in Franklin County because the federal data that's available incorporates hospitals. And
Oh,
hospitals are technically in the same sector, even though they are very different, much larger, different business model. And obviously, they employ many, many more people. But based upon our membership and actually a member survey we're hopefully wrapping up this week, we'll have a new number of how many folks are employed. It's about 15,000 across the membership,
holy
um,
cow. Wow.
which is significant. Uh, some organizations employ many more than others, of course, but it does give you that sense. But a challenge that we're anticipating, that I think other sectors are certainly anticipating too, is that once we get through the hardest part of the public health crisis, which I think is not too far away, a lot of burnout is going to drive a lot of that workforce into changes,
Hmm.
whether from one organization to another, we're leaving the sector altogether. Hospitals are seeing that, teachers and education are seeing that, a lot of other sectors will see that, but we're bracing for that too. And to answer your question, I think the answer is this has been the other front line of this crisis. And if you want to find a way to help your community, there is no better way to do that than to find a nonprofit and get to work. And it has been a range of clinicians and social workers and volunteers, as well as people just changing up altogether what they wanted to do and finding a way to work for a nonprofit or volunteer at a nonprofit. And all of those folks are deeply needed, are going to be that much more so in the months ahead. It's going to be a really interesting transition from when the public health element wanes and the other public health crises start to really take off. But I think we're in that purgatory right now where hopefully we can beat the next variant to the punch. Whether or not we do, we already know the mental health crisis is here. We know the addiction crisis is spiking. The housing crisis could be extraordinary. And all the people that have been delaying appointments and well checks are going to start going back to the doctor. And we're going to have a surge of need there as well. So the opportunity to help is going to be just enormous. And there's so many, I think, employment opportunities that will continue to percolate for folks to find gainful employment and employment that is also altruistic for individuals as well.
So I teach at Ohio State at the Glenn College, a couple graduate classes a year. And so many of the students that I have really are more interested in going into the nonprofit sector than government. There's a feeling amongst them that you can't get things done in government. But I also detect a fear of wanting to go into the nonprofit sector and not being able to make a living.
Yeah.
And, I try to emphasize the fact that making a difference in people's lives is super important. And when you follow that dream, you'll be okay. You'll eventually, you'll make a living, but that is a concern.
Yeah, absolutely. And as someone that had a circuitous route into the nonprofit sector myself, I understand those feelings. I I know that every single one of our CEOs would like to pay every single one of their staff better than they do or can. And many, prior to March of 2020, had made significant strides in instituting, for example, a $15 minimum wage within their teams. How that evolves going forward is, of course, an open question. And
Hmm.
I think the contrast between a hospital and a direct service providing nonprofit has never been more stark than a lot of the hospitals rightfully gave their staff bonuses at the end of last year because they'd earned it. Our folks can't necessarily do that. Some
Hmm.
of our folks have utilized hazard pay and tried to put in bonuses as where they could, but increasing the salary for especially entry level, but certainly all nonprofit staffers is a priority, but it's the economics of it are very difficult. And until the funding structure for nonprofits changes, I don't know how quickly we can see those adjustments coming, but um, there is finding that balance of your fulfillment out of work, and getting an appropriate pay so that you can be fulfilled, and not have to have two jobs, to do the
Right.
work, which some do.
Mm.
Um, but it is, I think, extraordinarily gratifying work, but it's also extremely challenging. Uh, I remember when I made the transition from Bricker and Eckler, where I was in private practice, to my first nonprofit role, which was not in my current job. And some of my old colleagues kind of joked with me, saying, "Well, is it nice now just having a 9 to 5?" And I said, "I'm working now more than I was at the firm."
That's
Um,
right.
and that has been all the more true in this job as well. And I think a lot of our folks feel that way. But these are complex businesses with very complex business models and funding structures. It's just the latitude for finances is not as wide. You're not
Hmm.
selling a widget, as Margie Pizzuti from Google Columbus always says, and therefore you don't have the flexibility to pay as much as you'd like to pay. But that's a problem for another day.
Yeah, that could be a whole nother interview for sure. And
That's
I
right.
completely understand why. So, um, what, how long have you been at the chamber now? You've been there
It'll be 4 years, the end of
4 years?
April.
Yeah. So what do you see when you look out past this pandemic? I do think that we're going to see even more need for nonprofit past the pandemic because I see a lot of generosity happening now because of the pandemic. But then when it's over, I hope people still see how important it was to support the nonprofit sector. But what do you see as a vision going forward for the Human Service Chamber, and what will be the hot button issues? Do you think they'll be the same? Do you think they'll change?
It's a great series of questions. Let me start by answering it about the chamber specifically, and then I'll try to talk about the health and human services sector a little bit more broadly if I can. And I'll emphasize if I can, because so much is difficult to predict now, as you well know.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I think for the chamber, we've been approaching the last 11 months, week to week. Um, we knew the end of February that this was going to become our focus for a while. We didn't quite anticipate the depth or ferocity, or duration of it. We knew in March that we'd be doing this for at least a year and a half. It depended upon the vaccines, which have exceeded all of our expectations in terms of their efficacy, just not the rollout. That's going to change too, but I digress. So we pivoted in March of 2020, knowing that we could focus a week out doing 5 specific things. I can talk about that later. And I know that another inflection point is coming for us. Um, and when we started turning the year to 2021, I circled the end of the first quarter as the time when we'd be able to start making that next pivot. And I think that next pivot will last us through the end of 2021. At some point between the end of March and the end of 2021, we need to be doing another strategic plan of sorts, at least informally. But the focus will be the same as it was in February, March of 2020, of how do we save as many lives as possible by supporting our members? How do we alleviate as much suffering as possible by supporting our members in our community? And I think if we keep that in the focus, the chamber's work won't change too much until the end of this year. I think my time will divvy up a little bit more, given whatever crisis is in front of us over the course of this year. But the real shifts will be coming for the chamber in 2022. I just bought myself some time to answer your question.
Yeah, you did.
And I think I think the chamber's future will have as a foundation advocacy, business supports, and convening of our membership to drive collaboration. But the real shift for us will be on how do we go from being hyper local focused to building a network, or connecting to a network across the country so that we can provide better advocacy and better member services and better collaboration. I think that's the goal. Um, Not to have a centralized model per se, but to have affiliates and peers across the country so that we can do this work together. There are very few
Mhm.
local chambers like ours for nonprofits across the country. I'm aware of about 10. There are,
Hmm.
of course, state affiliates, state organizations, and they do great work. But that hyperlocal element has been really impactful. And we think we've shown our business model for it, over the 11 years that our organization's been in existence. But now it's time to take the next step so we can do more to help more people.
Right. So, what do you think, um, you know, what has been some of the great accomplishments in the past of having, especially the major members join band together in that with a hyper local focus? Do you feel?
Right.
I mean, I could see how banding certainly at a much, focusing more to the state and to the federal government. Um, but surely having banded together at a local area has had some effect. Has it brought more of a voice? Has it brought any more funding, do you think? I mean, what do you think have been the positives of that?
Right. So let me start by answering this way. When 2020 started, we had 80 member organizations, and that grew by 30 over the course of the year, not because we were soliciting, but because people wanted to have a stronger, more efficient channel to communicate, um, information, communicate needs, as well as to, um, receive supports, dollars, other resources. I think that's the greatest value add that you can have as a hyperlocal organization: efficiency, as well as amplification. So, for example, um, since this crisis began, we started conducting weekly assessments of our membership so we could gather information, share it with our public officials as well as area funders. Um, I think those reports and the willingness of all these organizations to share with one another as well as with their elected officials in an efficient way resulted in the city and the county prioritizing CARES dollars so much for health and human services organizations. When Mayor Ginther first said, they were going to allocate $57 million or so for human services, all of us were extremely delighted and extremely relieved. Um, the dollars that ended up flowing out to support members' operational supports as well as pass-throughs to their clients were enormously helpful and are a key reason why none of our members have shuttered over the last year. Um, in terms of PPE distribution, which has become a focal point for us at the chamber, we've been able to channel over 400,000 masks alone to our member organizations.
Wow.
Being that distribution point or pass through has only been possible because we have so many organizations that we get to serve. Being able to have roundtables with local, state, and federal elected officials that focus on Franklin County has been possible because of the efficiency that being a part of a hyperlocal organization can provide. So, if we weren't valuable before 2020, we found a way to be just because we're here.
Right.
And we've
Right.
tried really hard not to mess that up, to be of service both to the organizations and the people they serve, as well as to the public officials in our community trying to figure out how to navigate this. So if we've been a source of information and access to insights from the ground, as well as asking for more help to meet what our folks are seeing on the ground, then great. And I think that has been the case, and we'll try to continue situating ourselves in that way.
So I'm pretty sure that almost everybody who belongs to our Workforce Advisory Council is a member of your chamber. And one of the conversations, we're currently doing a strategic plan, trying to more solidify an actual workforce system. For some of the very reasons you have the chamber, right? So that we're looking at what our gaps are, what our services are, how can we pull money into the system that funds, important initiatives. And of course, in doing that, we realize, not only do we have service gaps, but we also have service overlap in some cases. And starting to have the conversation as part of this strategic plan, what does that mean? Should everybody be doing X, or who's more efficient? Always a wrought conversation, right? Does the chamber have those kinds of conversations, or do you try not to get into that conversation as you look at, a resource pie and how you divvy up that pie?
Yeah. So the answer is yes and no.
Sure,
um,
sure.
it depends upon on the subject. So, for example, when the chamber was founded in 2010, long before I had joined, one of the two explicit goals was for the chamber to host or facilitate a range of shared services to create efficiencies for individual organizations, as well as the sector, as well as the community at large. And for various reasons, that never came to pass. And when I started in 2017, we identified that as a key goal, but saw that being a significant enough amount of work that we wanted to focus on our more fundamental priorities in the advocacy space before we dove into that.
Mm-hmm.
So March arrives, and it's clear that our folks are going to need a lot of different things that we don't usually provide, that weren't readily accessible in any other place. We determined we had to start providing shared services immediately, and have found a number of different pro bono or paid for services that have been of benefit to the sector as a whole, and saved folks money, both directly not having to pay for the service and also indirectly in getting information they need to make different decisions and better decisions. We'll keep that up for sure. Those will be new investments that we'll start making as we navigate our way out of this. And having those conversations about how we can be a host of shared services or a facilitator of them will only continue to grow. And I'd love for the chamber to be the kind of organization that can provide, access to continuing education, like an arrangement we have right now with the College of the John Glenn College at Ohio State right now, a deal on getting legal information, an arrangement we have with Bricker and Eckler right now, or something that we have only aspired to, which is a deal on insurance and benefits to save our folks a bundle of money as well. We want our folks to be able to focus on the services they provide, but to do that, we have to help them save on back office costs. Can we get you a deal on paper? Whatever the case may be, we want to help, and we see opportunities there. And then systemically, and getting into policy, we think there's all sorts of opportunities as well. There are always limitations. There are always going to be challenges with each of those different prongs, but it's clearly been an area of need, and it's an opportunity to help the sector do better. So we'll keep pursuing that as we go forward, no matter what comes.
And that's a good move, right? I can tell you, even I was not concerned about forming a workforce advisory council because, for example, right now, 68,000 people who could be working are not. I couldn't handle 68,000 people in the job center, right? So all of our partners, all of us working together, there's plenty to do. It's just making people understand on the outside who are, providing resources, that, there's plenty to do. And, nobody asked that of Don DePiero and the business chamber, right? Have you thought about, you got people overlapping services? No, they don't ask that. They assume that people are going to compete or they're going to do what they need to do.
That's right.
Yeah. So we've come to that time. I want to ask you the most important question I ask, and that is, when you look back to your 18-year-old self, What advice would you give yourself regarding careers?
Yeah. So, uh, to set the stage a little bit, to allow me to answer that question, when I was 18, I was moving out of state for college, and I really did not know what I wanted to do professionally. I had long wanted to be a pediatrician and knew after about a week of college chemistry that I did not want to be a pediatrician. Um, not only because I didn't love chemistry, I loved all the other sciences. I just did not care for chemistry, but because I knew that I was going to change my mind a lot. I needed that flexibility as a professional, and I knew that even a week into my freshman year of college. And I knew that being a doctor doesn't give you flexibility. Many find it. I didn't anticipate that as an 18-year-old. So I think what I knew is that I cared a lot about people. I cared a lot about a lot of causes. And when I was 19, I discovered a passion that has continued driving me and has driven a lot of my professional choices. So I'll cheat a little bit and say, if I were 19, what would I have done?
Sure.
But I took the proverbial class in college where I learned far more than I ever had before about the resegregation of our public school system and the way we fund it. And my fury at learning about those in depth and the history behind it and the intentionality behind it and the inertia around both uh, made me want to get into education policy. But I had no idea how I was going to break into that as a 19-year-old. And it took me a while to find my way into a career where I thought I'd be able to do something about it. We haven't gotten into my circuitous career journey and to bore your listeners or you, but suffice it to say, I wish I could tell my 19-year-old self that taking that journey and figuring it out was okay. I stressed myself out so much at every step of the process as an undergrad, in between undergrad and grad school, in between grad school and law school, uh, where I just couldn't seem to figure out how I could help fight those two, what I thought were significant problems. And it took me going through a strange but wonderful career journey to finding this role where I can indirectly tease out those two problems a lot, and I want to do a heck of a lot more there. But I wish I had known it'd be okay, and I'd find my way into a role where I could do something about it. I wish I could tell myself, you don't need to have it figured out when you're 23, and it's okay if you don't. Uh,
Hmm.
I did not think it was okay that I didn't have it figured out. And I'll tell you, I had two significant disappointments in my professional career along the way that I don't mind sharing. When I went to law school, I went expressly because I thought that was the way in which I could use whatever few skills I have to tackle the way we fund public schools and the resegregation of public schools. And I went to a law firm in Columbus that had successfully challenged the way we fund public schools back in the late 90s, early 2000s in the Ohio State Supreme Court. And I was arrogant enough as a new lawyer to think I'd walk in there and they'd let me just dive into that work.
Right.
They said, no, you're going to be a healthcare lawyer. And I had to learn a new craft. And I had wonderful colleagues. I learned so much from them, and I still do. But I was tremendously crestfallen when I didn't get to do what I'd been trying to do for 10 years. And I left the firm after 3 years because I was ready to try pursuing that again. And I went to an organization called the Children's Defense Fund. And I thought, this is it. This is my dream job. Now I can dive into that work. And funnily enough, most of the work was in healthcare. Obviously, a very different kind of healthcare that I've been doing in private practice, but that was another disappointment for me. Not because I didn't love the work I got to do at the Defense Fund, I did, but because it wasn't precisely what I had been driving to do. And now in this role, my job is to be 100 miles wide and 5 inches deep. I have to be able to support a very diverse array of member organizations and executives to help them do the work on the ground to save lives and imbue hope into individuals' lives in the community. And there's so many systemic challenges that we need to tackle. And the best part of my job is that I have to take steps back from the urgent crises that are before us and think about the systemic, and then push our elected officials on ensuring the systems get better. And
Hmm.
that includes everything in the public school space, although it's not as directly there as it might have been when I was a 19-year-old. So I'm grateful for that, but I would tell myself to just be patient. It'll be okay.
And that would be very good advice. Well, and that is so true, right? I could not have predicted my career in any way, shape, or form. I just knew I wanted to help people. I originally thought I was going to be a social worker, but I was too upset. I would take people's problems home with me every night. And I'm like, okay, I'm not cut out for this, right? Um, Something you said though struck me about what you're doing in this work, and it's so important. If I may just add another question, I probably should have added before.
That's right.
Um, we're in a moment, as you well know, besides a pandemic, where finally the issues of social justice and the fairness and equity for people of color, people who sort of paid attention or maybe didn't pay attention at all before, seem to finally be getting it. But in your opinion, through the work you're doing with your members, how do we turn this moment into not a moment that's just here and gone, but is actually a moment where we don't start, we actually finish solving the problem?
Yeah, I think about that every day, and I will start by saying I don't know, and I don't think of myself as a cynical person, but it's hard to be optimistic that we'll figure this out and do it right. But that gives me a determination to work even harder to make sure that we do. Um, I think the problems intertwined with this extend into every element of society, and it's going to take that sort of concerted, concentrated, prolonged effort to change the way we live and change the way we deliver services and do business. Um, it isn't going to be just one or 10 things, and it certainly is not going to be a well-written statement that uses the right words.
Right.
And I will tell you, I was grateful to see statements coming out from folks that never would touch anything that they deemed to be controversial or political before. But my immediate reaction was then, okay, now look around you. Um, does your organization reflect what you're clamoring for in some of your words? What systems can you influence that you haven't been influencing in this way that you're clamoring against in these words? And what are you going to do about it? And I think that's where I'm trying to focus. What can we do about it? And what must we do about it? And what do we have to demand of ourselves to get there? Um, and I have to look at our organizations and the sector that we can touch and influence, and how do we push ourselves? How do we ensure that our our teams are more diverse from top to bottom? How do we ensure our boards are from the chair to brand new board members?
Mhm.
How do we help our funding community understand the need to fund differently and consider things differently? Um, how do we deliver services in a way that's more equitable and more thoughtful? But even if our sector did everything right, and a lot of them have been doing it right, um, that would be a drop in the bucket,
Mhm.
because they're still dealing in a system that they don't control. And a nonprofit service provider isn't charged with changing systems.
Right.
Um, and that's a significant frustration point for a lot of our folks. And yet they keep going at it. So how do we get that proverbial round table together, and then how do we go out from there and do all the right stuff? And we know that won't happen, because it needs to happen at local government, at state government, at federal government, as well as across all the other sectors, all working in concert. And that's extremely difficult to get done. That said, um, I think the moment extends beyond a moment when it becomes part of our Constitution, as individuals, as entities, as systems. Um, and I think this year can be another step toward getting there. Um, but there are so many different degrees and elements and priorities within it as well. There's a specific challenge in policing. There's a specific challenge in housing. There's a specific challenge in voting rights and civil rights, and on and on and on and on and on,
Right.
all intertwined in one way or another. So that's why I say with some reluctance that I'm not optimistic that we're going to get this right. But it's exactly why I say with determination that we have to.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yes. It can be very frustrating, but you have to keep moving forward, right?
That's right. And I'll tell you two things that we did immediately to try and do a little bit of a part and route to many, many other things that we need to be doing and should be doing that we're not. One of them was, how can we make some quick changes that we know will have an effect? So we created a board application on our website. So anybody in the community that wants to serve on a nonprofit board can put their hat in the ring, their interests, their skills, their availability, and importantly, their self-identifying information, so that our agencies can reach out to these applicants and say, we're interested in you. Are you interested in us? Let's get you on our board. And that has been tremendously well received by our folks. And I'd love to have 5,000 applicants in there. We don't have that, but we'll work on it. The other thing is, we send out a litany of resources to our CEOs and executive directors once a week as part of our daily communication. So every Thursday, they get a list of things to read, to watch, to listen to attend as much as you can attend things. And we always ensure we have whatever we can find that we think is of value to them on race, equity, inclusion, et cetera. Trying to give them as many resources as we possibly can. I know in this job, I know less than all of my bosses, but my job is to try and compile things efficiently for them and just say, here, use this information. They're all superheroes to me. They'll figure out good things to do with it. And if I can equip them with some more information, great. So we've done those two things. We have a heck of a lot more to do. But I'm proud of the diversity of our membership and of our CEOs and executive directors. And I'm proud of their commitment to changing things and to not accepting what has been anymore. I think there have been all of these ebbs and flows as a culture to address these inequities. I think we're at a bit of a zenith, and I want to see that keep going. And what I tell folks is that Columbus is not the best at this. We're the second most segregated community in the country by some measures, but we can be. And we can be the best at getting out of this, at figuring this out once and for all. We don't have to accept the way that it has been. We don't have to accept that people live here and there, and that's just the way that it is. But getting out of it is very difficult. We just have to have people all the way from the leadership to anybody else that's determined to change it. And I think that we can.
I love to hear that because I agree with you. So, Michael, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to spend it with me. This has been a really great conversation.